Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Jason Wright Show. I'm doing something today that I have not done in a minute, and that is a book review. And the reason why I think I'm doing this one today is because I was so enthralled with the book that I just read, and I'm not surprised because this particular author is one that if you know, you know. And it is, well, I'll just cut to the chase. It's Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand is one of the most controversial yet read authors of all time. So first, a little bit about who Ayn Rand was. Ayn Rand was an atheist, a self-proclaimed objectionist.
Objectivism. It's a guide to living here. Developed by this writer. Wondering who needs a philosophy? She answered that. To deal with real life, we need a view of the world and our place in it. Now, some people have strong opinions on objectivism. It's a philosophy that's controversial because it advocates selfishness and says altruism is evil. But we'll get back to that. Rand's philosophy looks something like this. It starts with the idea that reality is objective. The universe is what it is, not what we want it to be, and wishing otherwise won't make it so. Next, it states that our reason is all we have and all we need for understanding the world around us. And if reason is an absolute, we can't accept contradictions. It also says your highest moral purpose should be the pursuit of your own selfish happiness. Now, selfishness can be misinterpreted. It doesn't mean exploit others for your own gain. It means realize your highest potential by pursuing rational ends and live in harmony with others by respecting their right to their own life and happiness. The result of this philosophy is a life of reason, purpose, self-esteem, a philosophy for living on earth.
If you know that this life is all that you have, wouldn't you make the most of it?
And while most people know her, who know her at all, they know her from her books, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And for those of you who are not familiar with Ayn Rand's work, then if you've ever seen bumper stickers that say, "Who's John Galt?" or t-shirts or something like that, especially prevalent in conservative or libertarian circles, well, that's where that comes from, is the book Atlas Shrugged. And I had read Atlas Shrugged years ago when I was like in my, I think, late 20s, early 30s, and it had a profound impact on me. And I had always meant to read The Fountainhead and never had. And then finally, I just finished a book and thought, I want to read something that is both philosophical in nature as well as fictitious, that is a story, is something that I might get lost in. And let me tell you, The Fountainhead, right here, did not disappoint. This was an incredible read. And someone, I can't remember who said it, whenever they said that with Ayn Rand, you have to always remember that her villains are real, but her heroes are not. John Galt was not a real person, and it's the same thing with Howard Rourke, who is the main character of The Fountainhead. While there is no real Howard Rourke, there is certainly the enemies of Howard Rourke are people that we could definitely point to really quickly who mimic the enemies of Howard Rourke. And I tell you what, one of the things that always strikes me whenever I read one of these books, or having read both of these books, is I'm curious as to whether or not if the people who Ayn Rand is describing in the book that are the collective, the intellectuals, the people who are trying to be kind of like the central planners, I always wondered if those type of people, that are in real life,
660 billionaires, richest people in America, have become $1.3 trillion richer.
I always wonder if Bernie Sanders would read one of Ayn Rand's books and recognize himself. because there's a character in particular that I think of. His name is Ellsworth Toohey, who's a pivotal character in The Fountainhead, that I think is the proverbial Bernie Sanders type character, or Noam Chomsky, or Gore Vidal, these intellectual kind of thinkers and planners, but not necessarily doers. Now, that's not really fair to Gore Vidal or Noam Chomsky, because Noam Chomsky obviously was a professor at MIT, and Gore Vidal was an author. But think of like a Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, and this is not meant to be derogatory, by the way. Nothing that I'm saying in this book review is meant to be political in nature, ideological.
Relax. Try it.
I'm not comfortable.
I'm trying my best to just be objective as to what I thought of the book. So when I say these things about Bernie Sanders, I am not trying to knock Bernie Sanders. But in all reality, Bernie Sanders is not someone who you could say is a builder, a doer, so a creator. He's never created or done anything of that nature. He's more of the type of person that's tried to go and organize the work of the doers and the ones that have created, and giving him the benefit of the doubt. He's always done that with the best of intentions. Okay, so I'm not saying, I'm trying my best to just keep ideology out of this book review. But Ayn Rand, having come from a communist country that she migrated from, she grew up with very powerful bureaucracies that were more based on not meritocracy, but instead based on who you knew, connections, playing the political game, being a part of the collective and saying the right things, and being a part of the organizations that sounded good, sounded like intentions were good, but not so much known for actually accomplishing and doing things good. And she also saw the realities of how that can suck the human spirit away. And so when in her writings, they're almost like parables, her novels are like long parables of her philosophy. They give you a fictitious account of the philosophy of objectivism that she held. And so that's kind of what she did with The Fountainhead. And so let's get into what The Fountainhead is about. Now, as you can see, it's a really long book. It's, it's about a little over 700 pages, but it reads really quickly. It was the same way with Atlas Shrugged. When people see this, they might be intimidated. Don't. I'm a voracious reader. I read a lot of books, but I'm a slow reader. And this book, I knocked it out. I mean, I took my time with it. It took me a couple of weeks, but not long at all. Same with Atlas Shrugged. So don't be intimidated by the size of the book. It is, it's a real quick, fast read, and it's easy to follow. Even though Ayn Rand herself was quite intellectual and philosophical, the books are really easy to read. So don't be intimidated by the size of the books. All right, so in this book, we have Howard Rourke, it starts out as an architectural student at a fictitious college.
You want to stand alone against the whole world? There's no place for originality in architecture. Nobody can improve on the buildings of the past. One can only learn to copy them. We've tried to teach you the accepted historical styles. You refuse to learn. You won't consider anybody's judgment but your own. You insist on designing buildings that look like nothing ever built before. The school has no choice but to expel you.
And it shows early on Howard Rourke and a young guy named Peter Keating.
Survive unless you learn how to compromise. Now watch me. In just a few short years, I'll shoot to the top of the architectural profession, because I'm going to give the public what it wants. You'll never get anywhere.
And essentially, these two would forever, throughout the entire novel, be competitors of a sort, although you can't really say that Keating was a competitor of Rourke, because Rourke could have cared less about Keating. And the reason being is because Howard Rourke was a self-described egoist. He was only devoted to himself. And the work that he did reflected what he valued and what he cherished. And he could have cared less about what anyone else thought of his work. It did not mean anything to him to receive a compliment or an insult as long as he was proud of his work. And that's where the story begins, because he's been expelled from architectural school. because he refused to conform to ancient architecture and the classics and the Renaissance period. And it's really cool because the book, I learned some things about architecture that I'd never thought of before, but like most of the houses and things that we see today and modern buildings, they're all built as kind of replicas of Greek architecture, Renaissance architecture. It's all just kind of a retelling of design and architecture that has gone before. It's very rare that you find anything new and authentic. And that's what was really, you can see early on in the book, to the extent that he got expelled from school, that it just wouldn't, original thought being kind of the overarching theme, would not be tolerated, all the way from the earliest parts of this story. And what you can see with Peter Keating, he's more of kind of what you and I are used to here living in the Matrix.
It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Is someone who, while he probably does have artistic integrity, is very talented, but he's also very interested in wealth, in notoriety, being accepted, and even if he has to compromise his own standards, being liked and standing out in the midst of the collective means way more to him than his own integrity. And in fact, as one of my favorite quotes in the book reveals, is he would even be willing to sell his soul to conform and be a part of the matrix and the collective. And so essentially these two, Howard Roark never finishes architecture school, but still wants to be an architect. And he goes to New York and he meets up with what would be a mentor. And the reason why he chooses this man by the last name of Cameron, he was an architect that had built some of the very first skyscrapers, which were kind of like an affront to New York architecture at the time. No one liked skyscrapers. They thought they were hideous. And I mean, think about it even today, in today's terms. I can't remember the name of the two towers, but there's a couple of them in close to Midtown Manhattan. They're these ridiculously large, thin apartment buildings, and you look at them and they just kind of stand out as a part in the skyline and look kind of ugly. And they were criticized at the time of their construction, as were the skyscrapers of this time. And because again, they didn't have the architectural beauty and classic design that New York had been accustomed to, and it almost been kind of relegated to. And Cameron went against that, but he had fallen out of favor, and he was just scrimping by, and he was kind of like this mad genius. And what you see is, like with Cameron, Howard Roark basically says, or what Cameron tells Rourke is, you don't want to work for me. You cannot handle it. And if you do the things I do, you will die. You can't handle the pressure of trying to be an originalist in this business. It will crush you.
I ought to throw you out of here right now before it's too late. I wish I'd done this at your age. Oh, why did you have to come to me? I'm perfectly happy with the drooling dolts I've got. I don't want any fool visionaries starving around here. You're an egotist. You're impertinent. You're too sure of yourself. 20 years ago, I'd have punched your face with the greatest of pleasure. You're coming to work for me tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
You don't, and he just basically gives him every single reason why he would never want to work for him. But Howard Roark, of course, says, that's exactly why I want to work for you. And eventually Howard Roark breaks down Cameron, and Cameron has to give in and says, okay, fine, kid. If you are willing to take the punishment that comes with working with an architect like me, bring it on. Keating, on the other hand, who graduates at the top of his class, the golden boy from architecture school, goes to New York, goes into one of the big firms that everybody wants, to the Francone and something, I can't remember the other partner's name, that he goes to work for him and starts making a name for himself. And the thing that you see right away is that he's kind of dismayed at the fact that Francone, the lead partner, hardly even practices architecture anymore. He's more of a business development guy. He spends most of his time being a New York social mover and shaker and going to the right parties, getting the right awards, knowing the right people, and trying to get big commissions to bring in money. And the artistic integrity, or the designs and the architecture, are basically left to the draftsmen and the people that work in the company, and he doesn't even care about it anymore. And Keating is kind of shocked by this at first. But as time goes by, what you see is Keating gets sucked into that world where all he wants is to be a partner in this architectural firm. While Howard Rourke, through a series of incidents where he's having to maintain his integrity, ends up losing everything. And there's a point where he almost can't even afford food, heat, anything. But it doesn't bother him. He would rather be broke, homeless, and hungry, but have his integrity, than sell out and be like Peter Keating. But these two keep interacting throughout the entire book, so it shows you the contrast of the lives that they're leading. Later on in the story, we're introduced to the character Ellsworth Toohey.
You're walking the streets while they're doing the work which you love but cannot obtain. This city is closed to you. It is I who've done it. Don't you want to know my motive?
No.
I'm fighting you, and I shall fight you in every way I can.
You're free to do what you please.
Mr. Rourke, we're alone here. Why don't you tell me what you think of me in any words you wish?
But I don't think of you.
And what you learn is that he has enormous power over commissions received, the notoriety that architects get, all based on his thumbs up or thumbs down or commentary of the work that is performed. And he's kind of used as the illustrative person of how the media shapes public opinion. And through him, as well as a series of other characters, you learn that there's this wealthy, elitist group of thinkers who have essentially never accomplished anything or achieved anything on their own, and they have no means by which to do it, and realize, or they think it's their job to essentially promote the mediocre people of society. The people that will never be a Howard Rourke with original ideas, genius talent, that don't need to be a part of the collective to survive. They're so good that they can kind of be their own person. In fact, I tell you, a fictitious character that it really reminds me of is a Don Draper, if you're a fan of Mad Men.
I feel bad for you. I don't think about you at all.
If you know anything about that show, Don Draper was basically someone who could live his life on his terms, selfish to a fault, totally egocentric, but he was so good at his job that he would always work. People would always end up hiring him. Even when he had almost blown everything, he was so good at what he did that in spite of all his faults, he would get hired. And so therefore, he was impossible to control. That was Ellsworth Toohey and all the other mediocre elitists' biggest fear, is people who didn't need them. And so this Toohey character, he essentially, throughout the course of the book, you see that he was the one who pulled the levers of public opinion, essentially. And then finally, as the book goes on, there comes this one commission that's available from a really wealthy guy who is kind of a shyster. He's got a ton of money, but he's made it kind of in a nefarious way, probably insider trading in the stock market, and probably has some, who knows, maybe loan shark outlets. He's a guy, everybody knows he's got a ton of money, but they also know he's lacking in character. One of the things he decides to do is build a temple for humanity. It's kind of like how he wants to wash away his sins. He thinks that if he can give something back to humanity in the form of this great temple, that will be how he buys his soul, if you will. And at first, you think there's no way Howard Rourke would give or would receive that commission, because he is the one person that doesn't give a damn essentially about all of humanity. He only cares about what he likes, what he enjoys, and expressing in his own personal life the potential of man and what man can do. But Ellsworth Toohey has an idea. He convinces this this wealthy guy to give Howard Rourke the commission. And as the reader, you're as confused. You're like, what's he up to? There's got to be some nefarious reason for Toohey to want Howard Rourke, the architect he hates most, fears most. Why would he encourage him to give him the commission? Well, we find out why. Because Howard Rourke did exactly what Toohey knew he would do. He built an incredible building that was absolutely stunning, and everybody knew it. And as soon as it was built, Ellsworth Toohey then criticized the building. In fact, he turned public opinion so far against it that the wealthy man that commissioned the Temple for Humanity to be built, he actually sued Howard Rourke in a very public forum, and then the temple ended up being something that was basically altered and stripped of Howard Rourke's identity on it and made to look more like classical Renaissance architecture, which it kind of reminded me of, and I'm going to probably get a little bit controversial here, so just bear with me, but this is something I thought of because I happened to finish the book around the same time as the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. And I couldn't help but make this comparison of the people who decided to do what, as I think we can all agree, was a pretty controversial opening ceremony to the Olympics this year. And, you know, you have all these athletes that exude the excellence of the human spirit. These are human beings that are exceptional. They are superior athletically and in some ways mentally than a lot of us. I mean, I'll say it, that I guarantee you, both from an intellectual standpoint, an athletic standpoint, the discipline and the grit and the work ethic that these athletes have, it's something far greater than I possess. And so they exude excellence. And so because of that, and because the whole Olympics is a celebration of excellence, it seems like the people who decided to do the opening ceremonies had to make sure they put a stamp of lack of talent, mediocrity, and people that could absolutely never be in the Olympics front and center. That's what we opened up with, is just these people that could not, on their best day, ever be in the Olympics. And so that kind of became the dressing on top of these amazing athletes, right? It's very similar to what happened with this temple that Howard Rourke designed. It was beautiful, amazing, and awe-inspiring, and displayed human achievement and what humans were capable of. And Ellsworth Toohey could not have that. So he had to bring in and suggest, and through the lawsuits and all this, that the mediocre architects come in and put their stamp on it and cover it up so that they would get the credit for what would ultimately be this temple, as opposed to Howard Rourke. So then later on, Peter Keating, he's been living in the Matrix, but due to some things by Ellsworth Toohey and the media and other top turns in life, he realizes that he's basically a shell of a man. He is, and there's one, and he's just down and out, and he's about to, his firm is basically kind of washed up because he's no longer the golden boy in New York architecture. But Howard Rourke has started to basically just kind of prove the hypothesis of, I think it was Dave Grohl that once said, if you do something good enough for long enough, eventually someone will notice and pay you to do it. And that's what Howard Rourke did. there were enough people that disregarded the critics and the collective and saw the genius of Howard Roark to give him work. So he was building a business over here on his own. But there was this commission that came up that was to build some public housing. And one of the things that could not be figured out was how to build this public housing to where it could actually be done cheap enough for people to pay the rent and the government not have to subsidize it to such a great degree that it made the whole thing impossible to build. And Ellsworth Toohey, being this architectural credit and big collective guy, he had a lot of influence over this project. And so Peter Keating went to him and said, why have you not talked to me about getting this commission? You know I need this. You know I want this, because by this time they had become best friends, but Ellsworth Toohey didn't have any real friends. Ellsworth Toohey used everybody to gain power and influence, and he had started to promote a couple of other architects as opposed to Peter Keating. And so essentially they have a conversation. And he's like, well, Peter, I had no idea you would want this. And he said, well, here's the deal. If you can design something that we can build cheap enough, that's what matters. This has to be not only incredibly livable, but it must be incredibly efficient, and you've got to be able to make it to where it can come in at a price that the apartment units rent for, like, I don't know, $10 a month, $15 a month, it doesn't matter, and make the numbers work. That's what you got to do. Well, Keating knew he couldn't do that, but he knew one architect who could, because it's the same architect that Peter Keating had been going to his whole life for help, and that was Howard Rourke, the egoist. They didn't care about doing what everybody would love and give him praise for, but just cared about the actual work. And so he goes to Howard Rourke and he says, I need your help one last time. And he by this time, he took the stand during the lawsuit of the temple and had completely betrayed Howard Rourke multiple times. But Howard Rourke looks at him and essentially kind of takes pity on him, which is something that that Howard Rourke rarely showed anyone, was pity. But he decides, I'll help you. I will draw this, but there's a catch.
Is there any kind of payment I can offer you?
Yes, there is. Now listen to me. I've worked on the problem of low-rent construction for years. I thought of the new inventions, the new materials, the great possibilities never used to build cheaply, simply, and intelligently. I loved it because it was a problem I wanted to solve.
Yes, I understand.
Peter, before you can do things for people, you must be the kind of man who can get things done. But to get things done, you must love the doing, not the people. Your own work, not any possible object of your charity. I'll be glad if men who need it find a better manner of living in the house I build. But that's not the motive of my work, nor my reason, nor my reward. My reward, my purpose, my life, is the work itself. My work done my way, nothing else.
This is where it's the philosophy coming in, not just a great story. He essentially says, I will draw these designs for you, and they will come into, I will make it so efficient that it will work. The numbers will work. I know none of the others could do it, but I can. But here's the deal. If you do this, if I draw these for you, and no one can know I had anything to do with it, it'll ruin your reputation, it'll be a scandal, no one can know. And I will never tell a soul, and nor can you. And by the way, Peter Keating even asked him, he said, I will give you the commission, I'll give you the fee. I just need something. I need some work to get me back on the map. Rourke says, I don't want the fee. I don't want my name anywhere near this. I don't want anything. But the only way you can get this, the only way I'll do it is under one condition. You do not alter my plans so much as a centimeter, essentially. He said, what I draw, you build. And Keating is like, I expect nothing less of you, Howard, because that's why Howard Rourke had lost a ton of really big commissions, because he would have people say, we want you to build this for us. In fact, there was a bank that he was supposed to build that would have saved his life at the time. He was going broke, and he had this president of a bank that was like, I want you to build our bank. I've got the board convinced that you're the guy. I know the situation you're in. I know you need this commission. And he said, all you have to do is come in, sell the idea to the board, and it's yours. He goes into the board and they start wanting to make little alterations to Howard Rourke's design. And this is where you see that if there's a Howard Rourke out there, I've never met him. That's why this kind of reiterates the fact that Ayn Rand's heroes are fake, but her villains are real. Howard Rourke broke, he's desperate for a commission, and with all he has to do is sign, make these little changes and sign his name and get one of the biggest commissions in New York available at that time, says no, and he walks away. So Peter Keating knew that this would be the condition. Howard Rourke, if I draw it for you, Peter, you cannot change it. But here's where the philosophy comes in. Howard tells Peter Keating, now look, this is a government project, so there's going to be government officials. It's a collective deal. This is literally a project by committee. So Rourke knew that Keating would be under enormous pressure to make changes. Everybody would want their little pet design into the building, a little change here, a little change there. He knew what he was going to go up against. I mean, Howard Rourke would have never accepted a commission for a government building, would never have done it because he wouldn't work with a bunch of bureaucrats. He wouldn't do it. So therefore, he knew what Keating was up against. Well, sure enough, Keating gets the commission and the bureaucrats start making changes to the design. And when it starts being built and Howard Rourke sees what's happening, and by the way, this broke their contract, and the deal was, if you make one change, I will expose to everyone that this was what I drew, that you came to me, you'll be ruined for good, it'll be a scandal, but I won't care. That's your punishment. But instead, what he does is he ends up blowing up the building. Howard Rourke does. Howard Rourke blows up the government project. And it's almost like the artist who shred his art here recently. I can't remember his name. I'm just thinking of it now. I can't remember, but there was an artist at a Sotheby's or Christie's auction house here recently that had this priceless piece of art and then shred it in front of everybody.
Art connoisseurs could only watch in horror as an expensive piece was shredded before their eyes.
But that's the power of someone who's an incredible artist, is they realize they hold the cards. Now, one of the characters I haven't mentioned that's also tied through here is Dominique Francone, who was the daughter of the first big architect that Peter Keating worked for. There's a lot of characters, and there's a love story between, and Gail Winan, who is the big newspaper. Think of the Rupert Murdoch of the story. And it's so crazy. That's what's amazing about an Ayn Rand story, is the characters that existed back. I think this was written, I can't remember when this book was written. Let's see. Unbelievable. 1943. There's a Rupert Murdoch character in here. There's an Elon Musk character in here. There is a Bernie Sanders character in here. What this shows you, there's nothing new under the sun. That's what will blow your mind about an Ayn Rand book. I can guarantee you, if you read this, you will be like, that's just like this group, this person. That's like, they hate that person for this reason, this reason. It's mind-blowing. So, eventually, Howard Rourke blows up this government project. And of course, is arrested for doing it. And he never denies it. He says, yeah, I did it. And he didn't care about, he would rather live in jail by himself as a completely free person than to be confined to living in the matrix, essentially. He didn't want to live in the matrix. But one of the greatest quotes of the whole book, before he ends up when he's telling Peter Keating, if you do this, you're going to have so much pressure to make changes, to make alterations, and you're going to have to be ready for that. He tells him, there's one thing I want you to do. This is one of my favorite quotes of the whole book. So Howard Rourke and Peter Keating are basically agreeing on the fact that Howard will draw this government housing project. So this is one of my favorite quotes of the entire book. Whenever Howard Rourke and Peter Keating are making this deal that Rourke will do all the drawings for the government housing, Keating will get all the credit. No one will ever know Howard Rourke had anything to do with it. Although, just kind of as a little spoiler, the drawings were so good that everybody knew. In fact, Ellsworth Toohey, the guy that had vehemently attacked Howard Rourke and wanted to see him destroyed because he knew how good he was, they looked at the work and knew only one architect was good enough to have drawn this. People sell their souls all the time, every day. And they think they're doing something great. You know, I will do anything to get that sale. I will do anything to get that project. I'll do anything to get that job. I'll do anything to get that girl. I'd even sell my soul. Well, selling your soul is easy. It's keeping your soul. It's saying, no, that job does not conform with my beliefs and my values. No, to do that, to get the sale, I refuse to do it. My principles are too high. That girl, beautiful but bad, doesn't share the same values I do. I'm going to keep my soul. That's the hard thing. And that's what Howard Rourke is trying to teach Keating. So then Howard Rourke gets arrested for blowing up the housing project. And then he gives an incredible speech that everyone should listen to understand what we are facing constantly today that was faced in 1943.
Thousands of years ago, the first man discovered how to make fire. He was probably burned at the stake he had taught his brothers to light, but he left them a gift they had not conceived, and he lifted darkness off the earth. Throughout the centuries, there were men who took first steps down new roads, armed with nothing but their own vision. The great creators, the thinkers, the artists, the scientists, the inventors, stood alone against the men of their time. Every new thought was opposed, every new invention was denounced. But the men of unborrowed vision went ahead. They fought, they suffered, and they paid, but they won. No creator was prompted by a desire to please his brothers. His brothers hated the gift he offered. His truth was his only motive. His work was his only goal. His work, not those who used it. His creation, not the benefits others derived from it. The creation which gave form to his truth. He held his truth above all things and against all men. He went ahead, whether others agreed with him or not, with his integrity as his only banner. He served nothing and no one. He lived for himself. And only by living for himself was he able to achieve the things which are the glory of mankind. Such is the nature of achievement. Man cannot survive except through his mind. He comes on earth unarmed. His brain is his only weapon. But the mind is an attribute of the individual. There is no such thing as a collective brain. The man who thinks must think and act on his own. The reasoning mind cannot work under any form of compulsion. It cannot be subordinated to the needs, opinions, or wishes of others. It is not an object of sacrifice. The Creator stands on his own judgment. The parasite follows the opinions of others. The Creator thinks. The parasite copies. The Creator produces. The parasite loots. The Creator's concern is the conquest of nature. The parasite's concern is the conquest of man. The Creator requires independence. He neither serves nor rules. He deals with men by free exchange and voluntary choice. The parasite seeks power. He wants to bind all men together in common action and common slavery. He claims that man is only a tool for the use of others, that he must think as they think, act as they act, and live in selfless, joyless servitude to any need but his own. Look at history. Everything we have, every great achievement has come from the independent work of some independent mind. Every horror and destruction came from attempts to force men into a herd of brainless, soulless robots without personal rights, without personal ambition, without will, hope, or dignity. It is an ancient conflict. It has another name: the individual against the collective. Our country, the noblest country in the history of men, was based on the principle of individualism, the principle of man's inalienable rights. It was a country where a man was free to seek his own happiness, to gain and produce, not to give up and renounce, to prosper, not to starve, to achieve, not to plunder, to hold as his highest possession a sense of his personal value, and as his highest virtue, his self-respect. Look at the results. That is what the collectivists are now asking you to destroy, as much of the earth has been destroyed. I am an architect. I know what is to come by the principle on which it is built. We are approaching a world in which I cannot permit myself to live. My ideas are my property. They were taken from me by force, by breach of contract. No appeal was left to me. It was believed that my work belonged to others to do with as they pleased. They had a claim upon me without my consent, that it was my duty to serve them without choice or reward. Now you know why I dynamited Cortland. I designed Cortland. I made it possible. I destroyed it. I agreed to design it for the purpose of seeing it built as I wished. That was the price I set for my work. I was not paid. My building was disfigured at the whim of others who took all the benefits of my work and gave me nothing in return. I came here to say that I do not recognize anyone's right to 1 minute of my life, nor to any part of my energy, nor to any achievement of mine, no matter who makes the claim. It had to be said. The world is perishing from an orgy of self-sacrificing. I came here to be heard in the name of every man of independence still left in the world. I wanted to state my terms. I do not care to work or live.
It's just like in Atlas Shrugged. Same thing. You'll read the book and you'll go, this is what's happening right now. Which is, again, like I said earlier, I wonder if the people who are for collectivism, call it socialism, government bureaucracy, acronyms and agencies, would they read this and understand why that can be problematic, especially since it's written by someone who had lived through communism and saw the absolute destruction that it can cause? I wonder. Anyway, this review went much longer than I wanted to. And those of you who have read it and you stumbled upon this review and you go, how could you not even talk more about Gail Weiland and Dominique and some of the other characters? It's because it's just there's too many to go into detail. I tried to highlight the most pivotal characters, which, let's face it, are Howard Rourke, Peter Keating, and Dominique Francone to an extent, but really it's Howard and Keating representing the sellout and the individualist, and then Ellsworth Toohey, who represents that elitist that runs today even so much of our thought. And you think about this, guys. Now, here's a great example. Here's a scene from the book. I want you to see if you can relate to this. How many of you have complained that the movies that win awards at the Academy Awards these days suck? They're horrible. Nobody watches them.
And the Oscar goes to The Shape of Water.
And you wonder, why in the hell is that getting an award? But the critics love them. The critics say they're incredible. You know, what's wrong? Why is there such a disconnect between the public and what we really like and what's really good? Like a movie like Maverick, Top Gun, we all love that, but we knew it was never going to be Best Picture. But the pictures that do win, nobody watches. Why is that? Well, 1943. There's a great example of this. You have all these elitists sitting around and they're discussing this play that one of them's written that absolutely sucks. It's horrible. It's awful. And they all know it's awful. But one of the ones that's a theater critic there speaks up and says, oh no, this is an amazing work. It is fantastic. And then maybe it's Ellsworth, Toohey, or one of the others, says, I think you're right. And essentially what they all start doing is showing us how they're going to prove their opinion will become the opinion of the masses. Because here's what they know. They know that they can convince the public that if they don't like the play, then they are bad people. And so that's exactly what they do. They write about how wonderful this play is. And people are sitting there. It even shows how people are watching the play and they don't know whether to laugh. They don't understand why they really don't like it. So then they just pretend to like it because they don't want to be thought someone who is a rube, not intellectual, a bad person. They think, I have to like this because the right people, the smart people, they like it, so I have to like it. Sound familiar? Are there some movies out there that we're all supposed to like, we're all supposed to celebrate? Some plays, some musicals, some songs, some artists? We're supposed to like them, but deep down we all know they suck. They're horrible. And I think if you can take anything from an Ayn Rand book, which is don't make objectionism and all this a religion. That's what some people do because it's so powerful. And Ayn Rand has the tendency, through these two novels in particular, to speak so clearly to the human spirit that it'll make you want to just adopt this individualist, whatever I want, I'm going to pursue my goals, my ambitions, and to hell with humanity, with the idea that as long as I'm pursuing my own excellence, the rest of the world will benefit from the great things that I produce. No, you have to kind of moderate what can happen when you read one of these books, because they will grab you and make you completely just shift your mind. But what I think, if there's anything that I've taken from both of these books, Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, it's that we have to be willing to be honest first with ourselves, knowing that we are the easiest people to fool. 2, if you don't like something, if you don't appreciate something, if you know that something's being celebrated that comes completely in conflict with your soul, and you know it, but people that you respect and you think are smart and you think are opinion leaders, and you default to their opinion at the expense of your own, or you accept their principles and their values at the expense of your own, start to have the courage to say, no. This is what, I guess it's Howard Rourke that calls these people, or Gail Wyland, one of the other characters, the newspaper guy, second-handers. These are people that basically die to themselves for the sake of someone else. That I know I don't want to do this. I know I think this is wrong, but they say I should, so I will. I don't really need this expensive car, but everybody says that I need this expensive car, and they'll respect me for having this expensive car. They say the expensive car is the thing I have. So instead of adhering to my beliefs, which is this is stupid and it's a waste of money and I really don't need it, I'm going to forego what I really feel inside and give away what I want to the benefit of another. It's getting out of the matrix. It's getting out of the matrix. So, highly encourage you to pick up the book. It's really good. You will be blown away at how much of it is, you can just switch in characters from 1943 with characters from 2024, agencies, newspapers, tactics that are used to shape public opinion, hate for excellence, acceptance of mediocrity. Taking someone who's never been successful at anything, who's never really achieved a whole lot, and putting them up against someone who's achieved a ton, who by all metrics has been successful, has achieved greatness, wealth, independence. Watch how that person, the individual success, gets torn down and demonized, and the person who, but for the opinion of a bunch of media, celebrities, and collectives, but for the fact that they support them because this person isn't a threat, because this person better represents all these other people that have never achieved anything on their own in their life. And then the ones who have achieved, they feel guilty about it and feel that they're virtuous for supporting the person who is one of the regulars that they can support. And because they know intuitively they can control that person because it's one of them, versus the independent success story they must kill and tear down. You'll see that in this book, and you will be able to replace Howard Rourke and Peter Keating with modern day stories that I guarantee you are being played out right now. Pretty cool. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Well, that does it for this episode of The Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas